The one where Chandler can't cry is the 14th episode of the 6th season of Friends. This is directed by Kevin Bright, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And there are three main parts to the narrative. Part of it focuses on Ross and Rachel and Jill, part on Chandler, and also then we have one on Phoebe. And I'll talk about Phoebe's first, then Chandler's, and then where most of my notes are with Ross, Rachel, and Jill. Phoebe is in Central Perk, and somebody comes up to her to ask her for her autograph. They're her biggest fan. We're led to believe for a good couple of seconds that they're just a fan of her music. But when Phoebe leaves, Joey approaches this person thinking that he's a fan of him, and this person reveals that Phoebe is a porn star. And then Gunther corroborates this. And the next thing we know, Joey goes to Monica and Chandler's apartment, having gone to the video store where he bumped into Ross, and they've got a copy of Buffay the Vampire Lair. And they're watching it, and I thought it was a really great thing to include the clips. Obviously, they don't show anything too explicit, but that definitely added a fun element to it so we could see what they were watching. And even better is when, well, first of all, they identify that it's Ursula, not Phoebe. And then Phoebe comes in and says, "What am I doing?" And her response to it was just fantastic. But that must be a really uncomfortable situation to see your twin doing something explicit. And Phoebe goes to see Ursula, and I love the fact that, well, first of all, she was in the middle of shooting a film at that point, but I love her hair. I love seeing Lisa Kudrow looking like Phoebe, but then looking like Ursula, and it was just brilliantly done. And I loved how this part of the narrative concluded as well, because since Ursula is using Phoebe's name, which I'm pretty sure is illegal, to release porn under somebody else's name when you're their twin, that has to be illegal, but Phoebe makes it work for her by redirecting all of Ursula's checks to Phoebe's correct address. And of course, because she's Phoebe and can prove she's Phoebe, then she was able to do that. And she also gets some fun out of it by telling people in public that they recognise her from porn. So I like the way everything wrapped up nicely. It was obviously an awkward situation for Phoebe, but it was good fun as well. Then we have Chandler, and they're watching E.T. Chandler, Monica, Phoebe, and Joey, and everybody's getting all emotional, and Chandler just isn't. And then they start talking about sad scenes such as Bambi. Chandler just doesn't get emotional at them. Monica gets out his childhood photos. Nothing. And initially, Chandler's not bothered by this. He just doesn't show his emotion, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. As long as he's not hiding that emotion, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. Although one could argue the inability to feel that emotion could potentially be a problem. But Chandler decides he's going to do something about it. And he reads Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I do love the moment where Monica comes in and he panics and throws it under the sofa, but there's no back to the sofa, so it just whizzes out. I rather enjoyed that. I'm easily amused. And Monica tries to make him cry with these hypotheticals about their wedding day and their children going off to college. And honestly, it gets quite heavy. And nothing. And we'll come back to Chandler in a little bit. Then we have Rachel and Ross and Jill. And this is obviously referring to the previous episode where Rachel saw Jill go into Ross's apartment and they shut the drapes. And the first scene in this episode is actually 2.5 hours from where the last episode left off with that part of the story. And then Rachel and Ross are in Central Perk, and Ross explains that actually he just closed the drapes to show Jill slides of his favourite fossils. And I have to say, Rachel referenced a trilobite. I had no idea what a trilobite was, but I've googled it. It looks interesting. But that clearly suggests to me, because I don't think Rachel would have known what a trilobite is had she not dated Ross. And that really suggests to me, well, it suggests two things. Either it indicates that Rachel actually listened to him whenever he was talking about things about which he was passionate, which is a good thing. Or maybe Ross just went on and on and on about it to the point where Rachel couldn't help but remember it. I'm leaning towards the former because that's what I'd rather is the reality. And Ross agrees that he won't see Jill anymore. If it's too weird for Rachel, if she's going to be uncomfortable, he won't see her, which I think is absolutely the right response. He very easily, I wouldn't have agreed with it, but he quite easily could have said, I'll date who I want. And if I want to date your sister, I will. I don't know why he'd want to, though. I just couldn't imagine being in a relationship with somebody, particularly the way he loves Rachel, to then want to date their sibling. I just would find that very strange. Clearly Ross didn't. But I do think it was great that he agreed to not see Jill. But Jill was not willing to listen to this. She turns up at his apartment, says she's had a huge fight with Rachel, and then we have this really brilliant moment, very well executed, where Ross is going to get his slides again, and Jill goes over to the drapes and she closes them, giving Rachel a little wave, as of course she's watching from the other apartment. And I will say, I've seen this episode many times, of course, so I know it was coming, but I feel like Jill kissing Ross felt unpredictable, or at least maybe it felt sudden, if not unpredictable. Just when it happened, I feel like there was maybe some anticipation of a bigger build-up. And that's not a criticism. In fact, that's a compliment. I think it feels like it came suddenly when perhaps there should have been a bit more build-up. And that works really well. And it probably says a lot about Jill as well. And Ross admitted to Rachel that she kissed him and that he didn't immediately pull away. Again, I admire his honesty. There's no point in lying about it because Jill would absolutely tell Rachel about it anyway. So I respect the fact that he was truthful. And then he says, if anything were to happen with me and Jill, then nothing could ever happen with us. And I love this for two reasons. One, Ross is admitting he still has feelings for Rachel. Two, Rachel didn't say that was a ridiculous notion. And it was very, very clear, in my opinion, in that moment that Rachel was kind of thinking, maybe one day something will happen. And then the floodgates are open. Chandler starts crying. He doesn't understand why they just can't work it out, which honestly is probably what we're all feeling at this point. And then Chandler cries some more. And it was a lovely way for Chandler's part of the story to conclude and for everything to be tied together quite nicely. It's a really solid episode. Every aspect of this works really well. Personal highlights. Well, I did love the conversation about the different emotional films. That obviously appealed to me quite a lot. The book Sliding Under the Sofa, absolutely brilliant. As I said, I'm quite easily pleased. And I think just how Phoebe handled Ursula with this one, and the appearance of Ursula as a contrast to Phoebe as well. And obviously the moment at the end between Ross and Rachel where they're both kind of realising that maybe one day something will happen. It's very rare that both of them have a feeling that's the same. Usually one of them's dating somebody else and the other one's pining after them, or one of them's going to break up their weddings. And I feel like this is the first time in a long time where one of them has suggested something and the other person clearly is in agreement, even if they're not saying it. So definitely a solid moment as well. Needless to say, the one where Chandler can't cry is a really brilliant episode of Friends.